Flint stopped in the middle of the White Creek. Behind him, 3 men locked Eliza Ward out of the only home her daughter had ever known. Ahead was a wall of black stone with no road through it. The old shepherd stared at that wall and refused to follow Eliza toward town. Flint, the dog, did not turn. A lock snapped shut behind them. Eliza looked back once. Her father's cabin sat beneath a flat December sky. Smoke still climbed from the chimney, but Caleb Rusk's men were feeding that fire now. They had arrived before daylight with a county writ, 2 rifles, and a paper claiming Josiah Ward had borrowed against the homestead before he died. Eliza knew the signature was false. She also knew a widow with $12, no lawyer, and a 12-year-old daughter could not argue with armed men carrying the county seal. June stood beside the hand sled, both mittened hands wrapped around the rope. "Mama, where are we going?" Eliza looked east. Dry Creek was 7 miles away. The church might open its basement. The hotel kitchen might spare soup. But Caleb Rusk owned the freight office, the grain scale, and most of the winter notes in town. Anyone who sheltered Eliza would find a payment called due before morning. The northern sky had gone green-gray. No crows sat on the fence. No cattle called from the lower pasture. A hard storm was coming. Flint gave one low bark. Then he climbed the western bank and trotted toward the Black Ridge. "Flint, no." The dog stopped at the first rise and looked back. June watched him. Grandpa taught him something. Eliza felt the wind push loose snow across her boots. She had buried Josiah 2 winters earlier. Since then, Flint had slept across her doorway every night. He had never wandered, never ignored her voice, never chosen a direction without first checking where she stood. Now he was choosing for all of them. Eliza tightened the rope around her wrist. "Stay close." They followed the dog. The ground beyond the creek rose into broken sage country. The sled struck stones hidden under the snow. June pushed from behind when the runners lodged in frozen grass. Everything they still owned rode on that sled. 2 quilts, a cast-iron skillet, a sack of oats, 4 jars of beans, Josiah's hatchet, June's school slate, and the family Bible wrapped in oilcloth. The rest lay in the yard behind Rusk's locked gate. Flint waited at every ridge. The moment they reached him, he moved again. By late afternoon, the snow changed from soft flakes to hard grains that stung their faces. The Black Ridge swallowed the last of the light. Eliza's skirt froze stiff below the knee. June's steps shortened. Eliza pulled off one glove and touched the girl's cheek. Too cold. She wrapped one quilt around June's shoulders. "What about you?" "I'm pulling." June knew that was not an answer, but she said nothing. Flint disappeared between 2 slabs of basalt. Eliza dragged the sled after him and found no path, only a narrow crack filled with thorn brush. "Flint!" a metallic sound answered. Not a bark, a ring striking stone. Eliza pushed through the brush. Flint was digging beneath a shelf of snow. His paws uncovered an iron loop set flat into the earth. Eliza stared at it. The loop had been hammered into a square wooden hatch. She brushed away more snow. 3 shallow cuts marked the wood. A straight line, a bend, then another straight line. Her father's survey mark. Josiah had carved that symbol into every field stake he trusted. Eliza pulled the ring. The hatch lifted only an inch. Flint shoved his nose beneath it. Together they raised it enough to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. Warm, dry air rose from below. June whispered, "Grandpa built this?" Eliza took the lamp from the sled and lit it with hands that would not stop shaking. The room beneath the ridge was larger than a cellar and stronger than any cabin in Dry Creek. Sandstone walls had been fitted without mortar. Cedar braces held the ceiling. Shelves carried flour, dried apples, lamp oil, candles, salt, wool socks, and sealed tins of coffee. A narrow stove stood beneath a clay flue. On a workbench rested a brass telegraph key. Beside it lay a letter addressed in Josiah's hand. Eliza sat before she opened it. June pressed close. Flint lay across the bottom step, facing the hatch. Eliza read aloud, "My dear Eliza, if Caleb Rusk ever comes with paper and a county seal, do not take the East Road. He owns the sheriff. He owns the clerk who records the sheriff's lives. Take June. Trust Flint. Go first to this room, then to Station 9. The road I built for you will not appear on any county map." Eliza stopped. The word road had been underlined twice. The letter continued. "Inside the blue tin are 3 days of food, a code card, and the brass key to the relay house. Do not search here for the proof. This place is for surviving long enough to reach it." June looked at the shelves. He knew. Yes. How? Eliza could not answer. A line had been added beneath the signature. "If Flint refuses a road, believe him." The dog rose. Eliza lowered the lamp. Through a narrow air slit near the ceiling, orange light moved between the rocks. A lantern. Then another. A man's voice carried through the storm. "Eliza Ward. Rusk wants the book. Give it over. And maybe the girl sees morning." Eliza knew the voice. Orenshaw. Rusk had hired him when he was 17. By 30, Shaw had broken 3 farmers' hands over unpaid notes and smiled through every hearing afterward. June's fingers closed around Eliza's sleeve. "What book?" "I don't know." Shaw's boot struck the hatch. Dust fell from the cedar braces. "Open it." Flint stood beneath the steps, teeth showing. Eliza slid the heavy timber bar into the iron sockets beneath the hatch. Another blow landed. The wood held. For now. She opened the blue tin. Inside were oatcakes, cartridges for a rifle they did not have, a telegraph code card, and a small brass key. No deed, no ledger. Only a rough map drawn on linen. A dotted line crossed the ridge toward a square marked 9. The hatch jumped again. A blade bit through the outer plank. Eliza searched the room. No windows. One stair. One flue. One narrow air tube. Then Flint left the steps and began scratching at the bottom shelf. Eliza pulled the flour sacks aside. Behind them, a cedar panel sat inside the wall. She pressed it. Nothing. Flint struck the floor twice with his paw. Eliza knelt. A wooden pin had been set between 2 stones. She pulled it. The panel opened inward, revealing a trench barely wide enough for shoulders. Old telegraph wire ran along one side and vanished into the earth. Josiah had not only hidden a room, he had hidden a line. Shaw's axe broke through the hatch. A gloved hand reached for the bar. Eliza snatched the stove poker and drove it upward. Bone cracked. A scream burst through the snow. "June!" Into the trench, the girl dropped to her knees. "What about the sled?" "Leave it." "The Bible." Eliza seized the oilcloth bundle and pushed it into June's coat. "Go." Flint crawled first. June followed. Eliza placed the lamp near the stove, scattered flour across the floor, and pulled the shelf back over the opening. Then she squeezed into the trench and dragged the panel shut behind her. Darkness pressed against her face. The passage smelled of cedar dust and cold iron. Ahead, Flint's claws clicked over boards. Behind them, the hatch split open. Boots crashed down the steps. Shaw shouted, "Find the field through the room." Eliza stopped breathing. June stopped too. The boards between them and the cellar were no thicker than a hand. A sack struck the wall. The shelf shifted. A lantern beam stabbed through a crack. Then Flint gave a low warning growl farther ahead. Silence fell behind them. Shaw said, "There." The cedar panel groaned. Eliza pushed June forward. Move. The trench narrowed around her ribs. Roots caught her hair. Frozen earth flaked down the back of her collar. A pistol fired. The ball struck stone beside her hip. "I'm not hit," Eliza whispered. "Keep moving." Flint reached around iron cover and clawed at the rim. Eliza shoved her shoulder beneath it. Snow collapsed into the passage. Cold air flooded in. June climbed out first. Eliza followed, then rolled the cover back into place, just as lantern light appeared behind them. They had emerged in a dry wash on the far side of the ridge. The storm erased distance. Basalt walls rose like black teeth on both sides. Flint shook snow from his coat, found the wind, and ran north. A shot cracked behind them. Stone sparked near Eliza's hand. She grabbed June and followed. For 2 hours the dog led them through country Eliza had never seen, though she had lived in Cinder Basin all her life. He found gaps in rock too narrow for horses. He crossed frozen gullies where sage roots held the snow. He stopped once beside a leaning post whose top had rotted away. Under the rot, Eliza saw a porcelain telegraph insulator. The hidden line continued north. At dusk, a square shadow appeared through the snow. Station 9. The relay house had been built against a sandstone bluff. Its roof sagged. One shutter hung loose. The telegraph poles around it leaned at different angles, their wires singing in the wind. A rifle barrel appeared through the door. "Stop there." The voice belonged to a woman. Eliza raised both hands. Flint walked past her, tail low but moving. The rifle lowered. An older woman stepped into the doorway. She wore men's wool trousers under a long canvas coat. Silver hair had been braided tight against her head. The thumb of her left hand was missing. She looked at Flint, then at Eliza. "You took your time." Eliza almost laughed from shock. "Who are you?" "Otta Pike." The name struck something in memory. Josiah had once spoken it beside the stove years ago when he thought Eliza slept. A line crew. A washout. A woman who could send 30 words a minute with frost-bitten fingers. Ada opened the door wider. Inside. "Shaw won't be far behind." The relay house smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and old batteries. A pot of broth simmered on the stove. Maps covered one wall. Telegraph wire had been coiled beside a work table. June sank onto a bench. Ada wrapped her in a buffalo robe, then knelt to inspect Flint's paws. "Still remembers every station." Eliza placed Josiah's letter on the table. "My father told me to come here. I know. You knew Rusk would take the farm. We knew he would try." Eliza's voice hardened. "My father has been dead 2 years. If you knew, why did you leave me blind?" Ada did not look away. "Because Josiah made me promise. He said Rusk watched you more closely than he watched any courthouse. If you knew where the records were, you could be forced to reveal them." Eliza stared at the telegraph key. "What records?" Ada poured broth into a tin cup and handed it to June. "Records proving half the deeds in Cinder Basin were manufactured after the owners died, disappeared, or missed one payment. Mine, yours too. Where are they?" "Not here." Outside, the wind struck the wall with a low boom. Ada continued. "Your father was a federal surveyor before he settled. He found something beneath North Table that Caleb Rusk needed. Not gold. Not coal, something more useful." Eliza waited. Ada shook her head. "The full answer is in Josiah's field book. The field book is at marker 47. We send a warning first." She sat at the telegraph key and connected 2 wet cell batteries. The line gave one weak click. Then another. Ada adjusted a brass screw. "Storm has the wire grounded somewhere south. We may get one message through. To whom? Special Land Agent Thomas Sloan. Fort Harlan office, 31 miles. Eliza looked at the walls. Rusk owns Dry Creek. He does not own the federal land office. Ada placed the code card beside the key. Read me the numbers in the lower row. Eliza did. Ada sent Ward Patent 91412 fraudulently size. Rusk Reckless active. Send Sloan and Federal Marshal to Station 9. Then she paused. The sounder clicked once, twice. A broken reply came through. The line went dead. Ada closed her eyes. Did they get it? Enough to start asking. A rifle shot shattered the porcelain insulator outside. The telegraph wire snapped and whipped against the roof. Orrin Shaw's voice rose from the storm. Now nobody's asking anything. June slid off the bench and crouched behind Flint. Ada reached for her rifle. Eliza looked through the crack beside the shutter. 4 riders stood beyond the fence. Shaw was in front. One hand hung bandaged against his chest. Behind him, a 5th horse carried no rider. He had brought Caleb Rusk's son, 2 hired drovers, and a county deputy. The deputy wore his badge outside his coat so they could see it. Shaw called, "Send out Josiah's map, and we'll leave you the house." Ada gave a humorless smile. "He means he'll burn it after he shoots us." The first bullet struck the door brace. The second punched through the wall and buried itself in a map. Ada fired through the shutter gap. One rider fell from his saddle, screaming about his leg. The others scattered. Eliza crawled to June. "Stay beneath the bench. Don't leave me. I won't." Smoke entered through the roof seam. One of Shaw's men had thrown a burning bundle against the back wall. Ada kicked open a floor box and pulled out a coil of cable. Josiah built one more trick into this station. She pointed toward a thick rope running through a hole in the rear wall. Above the relay house, an old snow fence crossed the bluff. For years it had trapped drifts before they could bury the telegraph line. Its lower braces had been fitted with release pins so a line crew could drop the loaded fence safely after a storm. Now, several tons of wind-packed snow leaned behind it. Ada wrapped the cable around the release handle. If we drop it, the front yard disappears. And the house may lose the roof. Shaw's men began chopping at the door. Eliza heard the first hinge tear. Ada handed her the cable. "Wait until they commit." The door split. Shaw shoved his pistol through the opening. Flint lunged. His teeth closed on Shaw's coat sleeve, jerking the gun downward as it fired. June screamed. The bullet crossed the room and shattered a battery jar. Acid hissed across the floor. Eliza pulled the cable. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the bluff moved. The snow fence collapsed with a roar. A white wall swept across the yard, lifted 2 horses off their feet, and slammed Shaw's men against the outer fence. The front half of the relay house vanished behind packed snow. The roof groaned. Ada kicked open a livestock hatch at the rear. Out! They crawled into the lee of the bluff as the chimney folded through the roof behind them. Shaw shouted from the buried yard. His voice was alive. So was his anger. Flint was already climbing north. They followed. Night found them on open tableland. The storm had stripped the world to wind, darkness, and the dog 10 feet ahead. Ada's injured shoulder stiffened. June stumbled more often. Eliza carried her for a quarter mile, then another, until her arms burned and her vision narrowed. "Meeker 47 should be near a split boulder," Ada said. They found the boulder just before midnight. A rusted survey spike protruded from its northern face. Eliza dug beneath it with Josiah's hatchet. 6 inches down, the blade struck metal. Her heart lifted. She cleared the snow. A copper survey tube lay inside a stone box. The cap was already open. The tube was empty. Ada looked toward the ridge. Shaw got here first. A horse moved in the dark. Orrin Shaw stepped from behind the boulder with Josiah's field book tucked inside his coat. Two men spread out behind him. He smiled at Eliza. Your father always did make people walk farther than necessary. Eliza placed herself in front of June. Give me the book, Shaw laughed. Caleb has been buying this valley one frightened signature at a time. That book is the only thing that says he didn't. Ada raised her rifle. A shot came from the dark. Ada spun and fell. Flint launched at the nearest horse the animal reared. A second shot struck the dog's shoulder, or passed close enough to tear fur. Eliza could not tell. Flint yelped and disappeared into the storm. Flint! Shaw struck Eliza across the face with his pistol. The ground rose and fell beneath her. When she could see again, Shaw had taken Josiah's letter, the linen map, and the Telegraph code card. He stood over Ada. Tell Sloan nothing came through. Ada spat blood into the snow. Come closer and ask. Shaw kicked the rifle away. Then he looked at June. Eliza forced herself upright. Leave her out of this. That is what your father said. The words froze everything inside her. Shaw leaned closer. He said it on the rim of Miller's cut, right before he tried to hold on to that book. Eliza heard the storm. Nothing else. You killed him. I recovered Rusk's property. You pushed him. Shaw smiled. The ridge did the rest. Fear left Eliza so completely that it felt like warmth. She lunged. Shaw hit her again. This time she fell beside Ada. The men mounted and rode south, carrying the field book. For a long moment, no one moved. June crawled to Eliza and pressed both hands to her face. Mama, I'm here. Flint is gone. Eliza looked into the white dark where the dog had vanished. There was no bark, no movement, no shape returning over the ridge. Ada tried to sit and failed. The line is cut. The book is gone. We need shelter. Eliza looked at the empty survey tube. Her father had built rooms under stone, routes under snow, codes inside letters, and all of it had led to an empty hole. For the first time since the gate closed, she wanted the east road. Not because it was safe, because it was over. June began shaking. That decided it. Eliza lifted Ada by the good arm. Together they found a line shack half buried in a drainage cut. It had one room, a rusted stove, and enough roof to stop the snow. They burned broken shelves. Eliza wrapped Ada's shoulder. June slept between them beneath the buffalo robe. Flint did not return. Near dawn, Eliza opened the Bible. A piece of paper slid from the book of Isaiah. She recognized Josiah's hand, not a letter, a list. Station 1, dry blankets. Station 3, lamp oil. Station 6, medicine. Station 9, wire. Marker 47, proof, north table, water. At the bottom he had written, a road is not where men say you may pass. A road is whatever still carries people home. Eliza read the line twice. Then something scratched at the door. She seized Ada's rifle. The scratch came again. June woke. Mama? Eliza lifted the latch. Flint collapsed across the threshold. Blood darkened the fur along his shoulder, but the wound was a graze. Between his teeth hung a torn leather dispatch case. Orrin Shaw's case. June dropped beside him, laughing and crying at once. Flint released the strap. Eliza opened the case. Inside lay Josiah's field book. Beneath it were 12 blank deeds bearing the county seal, a packet of signed receipts, and a payment ledger in Caleb Rusk's own hand. $40 to Deputy Marr, $75 to Clerk Bell, $120 to Orrin Shaw for recovery at Miller's Cut. The date was 2 days before Josiah died. Ada looked at Flint. That dog chased the rider, not the man. Eliza pressed her forehead to Flint's. You remembered the road. The field book held 40 pages of measurements, spring levels, claim boundaries, and names of families who had lost land to Rusk. A sealed envelope had been stitched inside the back cover. For Eliza, when the road closes, her fingers trembled as she opened it. My dearest girl, Caleb Rusk did not hunt me for our cabin. He hunted me because North Table sits above the only year-round spring in Cinder Basin. The railroad has surveyed a water stop through this valley. Whoever controls that spring will control the depot, the grazing leases, and every ranch that survives a dry summer. Rusk believes I filed the spring under our family claim. I did not. The original federal survey reserves it for public use. The field notes in this book prove the reservation existed before any of Rusk's deeds. Do not sell the water. Do not trade it for the farm. Do not let one frightened family bargain away what 20 families will need. I built the stations because paper can be stolen, courts can be bought, and roads can be watched. But a road made of memory is harder to close. Flint knows each stop. Ada knows the code. You will know what to do when the time comes. Your loving father, Josiah. Eliza lowered the page. June touched the map drawn across the facing sheet. Grandpa hid water? He protected it. Is that why they killed him? Eliza looked at the payment line beside Shaw's name. Yes. 3 knocks sounded at the door. Ada reached for the rifle. Eliza held up a hand. The knocks came again. Weak and uneven. Please, a man called. My boy can't feel his feet. Eliza knew the voice. Warren Hale. He had stood outside the grain store the day Rusk first challenged her patent. He had said Josiah's daughter would lose the farm because women mistook stubbornness for ownership. Now Warren leaned against the doorframe with frost in his beard. His wife supported their 14-year-old son. The boy's lips had gone gray. Warren could not meet Eliza's eyes. Our roof went in. The horses broke the north fence. I saw smoke here. He swallowed. I know what I said to you. June looked at her mother. Ada waited. Flint lay near the stove, wounded and exhausted, but his eyes stayed on the strangers. Eliza remembered Josiah's letter. Do not let one frightened family bargain away what 20 families will need. Bring him in. Warren stared at her. After what I did. If I let the storm decide who deserves a road, Rusk has already won. Warren carried his son inside. June gave up half her blanket. Ada heated water. Eliza rubbed the boy's feet until feeling returned enough to make him cry. At sunrise, Warren saw the blank deeds on the table. His face changed. Eyewitness Bell stamped those. Eliza looked up. The county clerk? He stamped 6 in one night. Rusk told us they were replacements for burned records. Will you say that to a federal agent? Warren looked at his son. Then at the woman he had refused to help. Yes, the storm did not break that day. It grew. By noon, another family reached the shack. Then 2 brothers from the South Range. Their barn had collapsed, and one carried a baby beneath his coat. The shack could not hold them all. Eliza opened Josiah's field book. The survey map showed 3 circles along the North Table escarpment. Not claim markers. Shelters. Flint stood when she pointed to the first. His shoulders shook, but he walked to the door. Ada said, he cannot lead in that condition. Eliza tied a strip of red cloth around Flint's neck. He does not have to lead alone anymore. They formed a line through the storm. Warren broke trail. Eliza carried the baby. June walked beside Flint, one hand on his back. The first shelter held 12 people. The second held 9. The third opened onto the spring itself, warm enough to keep a narrow channel of water moving beneath the ice. By nightfall, 23 people had reached North Table. People who had crossed the street rather than meet Eliza's eyes now shared soup from one iron pot. Men who had signed Rusk's notes read the payment ledger aloud. Women compared dates on seized deeds. The storm that was supposed to scatter them had placed every witness in the same room. On the fourth morning, the sky cleared. Sunlight struck the basin so brightly that no one could look east for long. Far below, 3 riders moved along the buried telegraph line. One carried a federal flag. Thomas Sloan entered the spring shelter before noon with a United States Marshal and 2 deputies from Fort Harlan. Ada's message had reached the office before the line failed. Only 9 words were clear. Ward patent fraud. Rusk recurs. Send Marshal. It had been enough. Sloan examined Josiah's field book, the blank deeds, the county seal, Rusk's payment ledger, and Warren Hale's statement. Then he looked at Eliza. "Where is Caleb Rusk?" Warren answered. "He'll be at the rail siding. When weather breaks, he moves money first." They found Rusk before sunset beside the unfinished water tower, loading a cash box onto the eastbound freight. Orrin Shaw stood with him, his coat torn where Flint had seized it. Shaw reached for his pistol. The marshal drew first. No one fired. For years, Caleb Rusk had survived because every victim faced him alone. Now a federal agent held the field book. A marshal held the county seal. Warren Hale named the clerk. Ada named the coded payments. Eliza named her father's killer. And behind them stood families from 11 seized claims. Rusk looked at the crowd and finally understood what Josiah had built. Not hiding places, connections. Roads no single man could close. By spring, 23 fraudulent transfers had been voided. Deputy Marr and Clerk Bell were sentenced for conspiracy and falsifying federal land records. Orrin Shaw received a separate murder charge for Josiah Ward's death. Caleb Rusk lost the freight office, the grain scale, the rail contract, and every acre obtained through the forged claims. Eliza returned to her cabin on the first warm day of April. The chair still faced the stove. Josiah's coat still hung behind the door. On the table, beneath months of dust, lay the original family patent. Rusk's men had never found it because Josiah had not hidden it in a wall or floor. He had folded it inside the false bottom of June's school slate. June laughed when she discovered it. Flint slept in the doorway while Eliza cleaned the house. The graze on his shoulder healed white. That summer, the families of Cinder Basin signed a covenant placing the North Table Spring beyond private sale. They rebuilt Station 9. They stocked every shelter before first frost. By the next winter, 17 hidden rooms formed a chain from the southern ranches to Dry Creek, each marked with Josiah's 3-cut survey sign. No one called them Josiah's rooms. They called them the Ward Road. On the first night snow returned, Eliza stood outside the cabin and watched Flint lift his head toward the Black Ridge. The county road lay east. The road her father built lay everywhere people had chosen to keep one another alive. Flint had not led them away from home. He had led them to the reason home was still there.